Hey everybody, it's Jeff, and this is my first production notes video to sort of talk about the making of this album that I'm working on. Hopefully it will be useful for people that are also interested in sort of doing their own music project like this. So I'm currently wrapping up writing the material and arranging the material, kind of going in and adding more details and fine-tuning and stuff like this. And so I really wanted to start with something on writing, talk about my writing process and answer questions about writing music. But I think it's actually better to start and build a little bit more context so that you, for people that aren't familiar with metal, can talk a little bit about the instrumentation, stuff like that, and also talk about my production setup, because that's sort of a big part of my writing process is, because I'm sort of writing and producing as I go. So as you know, this is a metal album, and metal instrumentation is a lot like most rock bands. You've got drums, you've got your bass guitar, and you've got some other guitars. And guitars are sort of the frontmost instrument. They're sort of like the biggest thing that you hear in metal, and you actually have a lot of the time like multiple guitar parts, not just sort of like rhythm and lead, but you actually might have multiple rhythm. When you double track, you might have layered leads like harmonies, basically kind of like what the Beatles would do with vocals. So doing those kinds of guitar parts can be a little bit hard to sort of hear in your head. So a lot of the time people will use like a multi-track recorder to prototype ideas. But in this case, because I'm doing everything on the computer, I can just use the same tools that I use to do the actual recording to try out ideas. I'm actually taking that a step further and doing a lot of my ideas in MIDI, so I can actually arrange and change stuff digitally, as opposed to like going back and re-recording a guitar part. I can just sort of change it on the computer and see how that roughly sounds. And that sort of gets us into my setup, which is pretty much everything behind me and a little bit more stuff in this room. Given that this is a home production, I'm trying to keep things pretty minimal, so I don't really have like a full studio of equipment, and I'm using a lot of sort of virtual instruments and equipment. So for example, my drums are actually entirely virtual, because drums are actually like a big deal to record sort of big production. You have to have a mic for each drum, you have to have like a big enough room, you have to soundproof it, all this stuff, and then you might not even get the sound that you want. It's actually pretty common to record actual drums and then trigger samples to sort of replace the actual recorded sound. So in this case, I'm actually just doing the sounds. Like I have MIDI and then they trigger the sounds, and so I have a lot more control over the drum sound, and it's a lot more practical for like being in this room. It's a lot cheaper too. But there's other stuff, like I also have virtual synthesizers, because I have synthesizers in this project, and analog synths can get pretty expensive pretty quickly. So having sort of virtual versions of those is a lot more cost effective, though it's kind of annoying when they crash. There's also a lot of really cool sort of other recording equipment, in terms of like compressors and like, all that sort of like production stuff. And even sort of vintage equipment that's sort of emulated in software. If you add all this up and you know how to make things sound real, you can make something that actually sounds like it was recorded in like an actual studio. It definitely takes practice, and I'm not necessarily the best, but at least it's sort of like passable. So we'll see. And that's actually what I did in pre-production. I sort of got everything I needed to sort of try and get the right sound and sort of the production setup and everything. And I did a demo track that wasn't any of the actual material that I was going to use, but it was to see if I could get the right sound. And once I had sort of ballpark sound, I'm like, okay, because that's really helpful in the writing process. Anyway, I think that's sort of a good overview of the type of music that I'm making and writing and how I'm producing it. Hopefully I'll finish up writing here in the next week or so, and then I can also start sharing some like demos and stuff too. But anyway, thanks for watching.